Hello everybody. Welcome to the Intel Buzzworkshop here at the Game Industry Conference. When I was asked to speak at this event, I asked the organizers what they would like me to speak about. So I'm used to being asked to speak about first-person shooters or programming, and especially my time at id Software. But for this talk, Intel wanted to hear something more. They wanted to hear about my early history, my history before the founding of id Software. So having started in the game industry as a full-time professional in 1987, I was around for the entire beginning of the computer game industry. I've done some remembering, looking at my archives and going through pictures with my friends. And much of my early history I'm going to talk about today. I've not really talked about it before that much. If you're wondering what's on the screen, these are some notes from a game I made called Dangerous Stave that I wrote in 1988 on the Apple II. How many of you draw pictures or write notes on paper when you're making a game? If you're making games, yeah. I thought so. A lot of people do it digitally now. So for giving me this tremendous opportunity to look back, I'd like to thank Intel and the GIC. And now I'd like to talk to you about my life in games before id. So I grew up in the desert of Tucson, Arizona in the 60s and the early 70s. So I was born a Mexican and a Native American from the Yaqui tribe on one side of my family, and my great-great-grandmother was an Aztec. The other side of my family was part Norwegian, and my great-great-grandmother was Cherokee on the other side. So I grew up near San Javier del Bac, which is an old mission that my family went to on Sundays. My uncle was a minister there, and my family was very Catholic. So I normally don't talk about my upbringing, but I think that it formed an important part of who I am, and it factored into the kind of games that I ended up making. So my mother and father, they married quite young. This is a photo from 1972. And while my family is now known for programming and design, it has also known tremendous success in dealing drugs and drinking vast amounts of alcohol. And unfortunately, death. 3 of my family members have been shot and killed due to drinking and drugs. My father even held up a convenience store at gunpoint to get my diapers. So I don't say any of this to disparage them. My family and my culture is why I have a deep appreciation for fun and laughter and entertainment. For as long as I can remember, everyone in my family barbecued almost every night over mesquite wood that we got ourselves from the desert. So telling stories and drinking until midnight when the coals were finally ready to cook over. And then saying this about my dad, I loved him very much. He passed away from alcohol and drug addiction in 2005 on the very same day that he was born at age 57. And he did not leave much behind. My mother eloped with my father over her racist father's objections, even though his ancestry had Cherokee blood. And I spent my first 8 years growing up in the desert on the south side of Tucson, Arizona, in the Mexican barrio. So my family was into games, just not the digital kind, because they weren't even around yet. They played cards and horseshoes and bowled. And for entertainment, I played in the dirt in the desert, you know, with the local animals. So if I wanted entertainment, I had to make it out of nothing. But in 1976, a Pong console materialized in my grandmother's house on a black and white TV. So it was mesmerizing to see something that I controlled move around on a TV screen. It was the first time I played a video game, and I was 8 years old. So in 1976, I discovered pinball in an arcade named Spanky's in Tucson, Arizona. It was dark, and it was really cool inside, and had about 30 pinball machines in there. Then one day, they put this cabinet against the opposite wall from the pinball machines. It was really big, and it was called Dune Buggy. So one look inside the cabinet through the glass told me that this was new and amazing. It used a black light, and it looked surreal. So I'd never seen a game look so interesting before. It looked like what appeared to be a ghostly Jeep that I drove around the landscape, trying to avoid another car that's on the road. and they used what's called the Pepper's Ghost trick that's used in the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland. And this game was called an electromechanical, which was before video. So at this time, my wandering through the deserts of Tucson came to an end as my dad left the house one day to get a pack of cigarettes from the store, and he never came back. So eventually, my mom sold the house, she got a divorce, she found a new husband, and after a year or so, we moved out of Arizona. It was still 1976 when we moved to Rockland, California, which was a sleepy suburban town of about 6,000 people. So unbeknownst to me, it was only a 2-hour drive away from much of the work in the early game industry that was about to begin. So there were some places in Rockland that had arcade games that were starting to appear. You know, all the games were about shooting aliens or asteroids. Space Invaders and Asteroids were pretty huge games back then. Before the first consumer-oriented home computers appeared, there were several dozen computer kits available. Only hardcore computer geeks were interested in them. There were some kludgy ports of mainframe games on these teletype machines delivered on paper tape like tic-tac-toe. Yes, the first computer games were actually distributed on paper tape. And at this time, the computer game industry was still very early. In 1976, the first wave of actual home computers were out. The TRS-80, the Commodore PET, and the Apple II. The computer game industry was started on these three computers. But mainly the Apple II computer at the time, which had color graphics, it had sound, and was the birthplace of many of the genres that games developed along. So the Apple II also influenced the next wave of home computers like the PC, but they wouldn't come along for a few years. Some of the earliest games on home computers started appearing in the few new software stores in 1977. They were on cassette tapes before disk drives were available on the Apple II in 1978. However, I was still playing with Tinker Toys, Lincoln Logs, and Erector sets. I had no idea that home computers existed. I was just a normal kid going to primary school. I played down by the creek with my brother and my friends like any other kid. You know, we played lots of Dungeons and Dragons. We rode our bikes everywhere, you know, without helmets. It was a really great time I'll never forget. And then one day in the summer of 1979, my brother and my friend Robert rode to the house on their bicycles, and they excitedly told me that they had found a place where you can play games for free. And it didn't cost any money. So immediately I get on my bike and I follow them. It was about a 45-minute ride all the way to the local college in Rockland called Sierra College. So it was the summer of 1979. Outside it was 38 Celsius. And there were a few students on campus. We made our way to the computer science building where it was a warm 18 Celsius. So in one room, they had Burroughs computers and Wang computers. No one was using them for some reason. But in one other room, there was an old mainframe computer taking up all the space. And the room right next to it was filled with about 25 terminals, all connected to the mainframe. And this is where a few college students were doing some of their projects. So my friend Robert showed me some old university text games like Hunt the Wumpus, Nim, and Poison Cookie, and other games. And we came back almost every day that summer. It was amazing that none of the students questioned the fact that two 11-year-olds are running around in the university terminals playing games. Sometimes if the terminals were all filled up, we played games on a teletype machine in another room. It's basically like playing a game where every turn is a computer printout on paper. So after the glamour of the text games wore off very quickly, I started to pay attention to what the students were doing on the terminals. And Robert told me that they were writing programs. So I started to ask the students what the words meant on the screen, and I started writing them down, and then I started to experiment with them on my own. And then before very long, I had an HP basic manual, and I started learning faster and writing my own first adventure game. So the summer was over, but my interest in programming computers had just started. And by the summer of 1980, Sierra College opened up a new room, and they filled it with brand new Apple II computers. So I spent the next couple summers going in and programming them. I was also telling my new stepfather all the cool things I was learning. So 1980 is also the year that I started spending a ton of time in arcades. So every week, new arcade games were being released. It was a Cambrian explosion of game design. It was a wonder to behold. You know, I played all the new machines. when they came in, but I spent a majority of my time around this game, Pac-Man. So the first time I saw Pac-Man, I was at a place called the Foothills Bowling Center in Auburn, California, and it was brand new. It was color, and you did not kill aliens with a ship. You're a yellow mouth chomping dots while 4 colored ghosts are chasing around the maze trying to stop you. If you ate a power pill, you could turn the tables on them. It was pretty mind-blowing back then. The audio was incredible with a background siren that served to keep you alert in case being chased by 4 ghosts wasn't tense enough. Intermissions with music and humor happened pretty often. It was such a game changer, and for me, it made an immense impact. I saw that games could be much more about, more than shooting aliens with a rocket ship, more about shooting later. So in 1981, I started high school at Roseville High in Roseville, which is the next town over. And in 1982, my parents finally bought an Apple II computer for the house. So long story short, I spent the next 5 years learning how to code and developed dozens of games. I'm not kidding when I say that I spent every spare hour programming during that time. I loved the summertime when I could actually have no school and I could code from 8 a.m. to midnight every day. So at the start of 1983, my family moved to England, and the industry had partially burned down in 1983, beginning of 1984, when the Atari 2600 market crashed. So consoles were dead at that point. Home computer games continued on after several good publishers went down. Of course, Nintendo saved the console industry in 1985. But did you know that this wasn't even the first console industry crash? There was one in 1977 that was caused by too many Pong clones. So during this time, I submitted dozens of my games and utilities to industry magazines and software publishers. I have a stack of rejection notices that remind me of my first taste of failure. In fact, it wasn't just a taste, it was a buffet of failure, and it would not be my last. I barely graduated high school, but I learned how to code in 6502, and I wrote 51 games by 1987. So I published most of them while in high school, and I got the cover of a magazine 3 times. So by 1987, the game industry had basically passed its big bang phase. Games were still being mostly written by indie developers and published by the likes of Sierra, SSI, EA, Origin, and many others. But internal development at publishers had begun as they started to look to professionalize their businesses and have total control over the teams making games. But it was the end of the 8-bit era when I got my first industry job at Origin Systems in 1987. Ultima 5, Origin's then current project, would be the very last one developed on the Apple II platform. So after 8 months, I left Origin to co-found my second game company, which was called Inside Out Software. After porting Might and Magic 2 to the Commodore 64, my next project was canceled by the publisher. So it was as clear as the Apple II's beep that the 8-bit era's death spiral had begun. So I left my second game company and I co-founded my third game company called Ideas from the Deep with a friend of mine just before we landed jobs at Softdisk in Shreveport, Louisiana. So it was the end of the 80s. After working so hard during that decade, writing 56 games, everything I had done was finished. The 8-bit market was done. I had to start all over again on the PC, which was a computer that was brand new to me. So, and I wasn't alone in this massive shift in the industry. Thousands of programmers, either they made the leap to the next generation or they got left behind. And MobyGames.com is populated with the credits of programmers whose work just ends in the 80s. Yeah, this is my favorite picture. I worked at Softdisk. After a year or so, before starting a game-only project called Gamer's Edge, I hired John Carmack and Adrian Carmack into the group and started making games in August of 1990. Better hurry up and take that picture. Okay. While beginning to write our first game together, which is called Slordax, Tom Hall would pop in at night and he would help make levels because he just could not help himself. He was too excited to know that games were being made in the office, right next to him. So I would take breaks from coding and I would play Ultima 6 and Monkey Island while looking up to the successes of these games as a goal that I wanted to reach someday, if only the right conditions would present themselves. So while making our first games at Gamer's Edge, John Carmack discovered the smooth scrolling tech while reading Michael Abrash's Power Graphics programming book that I had given to John, and it had just come out that year. So after a huge breakthrough in horizontal scrolling technology, we created a PC version of Super Mario 3's first couple levels, complete with enemies, the Tanuki suit, fireballs, and everything. So Nintendo loved it, but they decided against going forward to publish it. They wanted to keep their games on their platform. So instead, we decided to create a new game called Commander Keen that was published by Apogee Software, which was a shareware game publisher back then. So we had to create 3 games for Keen to be a success, not just one game, because we needed to do this as fast as possible for a Christmas release starting in September. We had to design the game to be an engine that worked on multiple data sets. So 3 months and a lot of pizza and Diet Coke later, we shipped the very first Commander Keen Trilogy on December 14th of 1990. It was uploaded to the Software Creations BBS in Massachusetts, the biggest gaming BBS in the United States. So it's important to note right now that it's the end of 1990, and before starting on Commander Keen, I had worked for about 10 years trying to make the very best Apple II games that I could, and then that 8-bit industry completely died. In less than 2 years after starting over on the PC, I made my very best game. So it was the best game that any of us had made in our careers. And it was the tipping point for us. We're no longer following behind the industry, but we were beginning to lead the industry. So as PC Gamer noted in January of this year in an article titled The 50 Most Important PC Games of All Time, Commander Keen put id Software on the map, and Commander Keen's groundbreaking, smooth scrolling on PCs was a revelation in 1990. And it's hard to believe today that the NES back then was capable of things that the PC could not do. So looking back, I'm humbled to have a game of mine included in this list for the year 1990 when Secret of Monkey Island was released. We were the only 2 games noted as being important in 1990 by PC Gamer. So we quit working at Softdisk after getting our first royalty check, and id Software officially started on February 1st of 1991. So the rest of the story is lightly covered in the book Masters of Doom, but now is your chance to ask me anything and everything. So that's the beginning. Now it's Q&A time.
We didn't meet before. I'm the guy interviewing you.
All right. Come on over. Battery is low.
Here's one for the crowd. Do we have somebody who could, just a second. Do you have somebody? Yeah.
All right.
Oh. Is it working? Yes.
1, 2, 3. Okay. Sorry, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Michael, CEO and founder of Booster Space. We are the organizers of the Buzzworkshop, Intel Buzzworkshop. And it's actually being streamed live on Twitch here. Hello, community outside in the world. And I have prepared some questions. If you have questions, please raise them yourself. I will collect, and then we can have a good community chat with you. If you could take the time and always look into that direction, then the people there can also see.
Hey, Twitch.
So very quickly, is it true, like 105 games? That's what Wikipedia says.
150.
150?
Yeah, I made 150, but only a little over 100 have been published.
Okay.
There's a bunch of games I didn't release because they were my first ones and they were horrible.
Yeah, okay. Talking like what you said with the Pac-Man anecdote, was that your main inspiration for Doom?
Oh, not Pac-Man was not inspiring me to make Doom. No,
it's very similar in gameplay.
It was Dungeons and Dragons that we got a lot of, like, basically the demons flooding in and all that stuff came from a D&D game that all of us used to play. So we played Dungeons and Dragons, you know, basically entire weekends for years at id Software. Even before starting id Software, we all played together, and a lot of the stuff that we put into our games came from D&D. So even Quake, the game Quake, the name Quake is one of the characters in the game, and even say Heretic or Hexen, lots of the names from those that are in those games came from the Dungeons and Dragons campaign.
Okay.
Catacomb, just all of our games. There's lots of like D&D things sprinkled all over them because we spent so much time playing it.
Okay, cool. Before I let you wait longer, please go ahead and ask your question.
From the past to the present, I would like to ask a question. I like this taco truck game which you're doing with your son. How about it? Is it out or?
Yeah, Gunman Taco Truck came out in January, at the very end of January on Steam, and I think iOS was just a little bit after that. So it's been out for a while, and Apple promoted it as like a hot new game for a week on the App Store, and then they promoted it on the Mac App Store after we released the Mac App version. And they're about to promote it again since iOS 11 was just released and the App Store got completely redesigned, and they have a Today section where they just basically every day talk about game of the day, app of the day, interviews with developers and stuff. So there's like interviews with Donovan and all kinds of pictures and stuff that he drew to make the game. If people don't know about Gunman Taco Truck, our son Donovan designed it when he was 9 years old, and then he turned 10, and he started to basically draw pictures and write down what all the parts of the game were. I gave him like design templates to fill out, and when he filled them all out, I gave the art to our artist, and he spent months making all of the pixel art, retro pixel art. And then we could start working on the game. And it took us about 2 years to make this game, but it's pretty cool mixture of 4 different gameplay styles all into one game. It's called Gunman Taco Truck, and it's on iOS and Android for free, and it's on Steam for PC and Mac.
Oh, it's really cool. Instead of building a treehouse with your son, making a game with your son. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good point. That's also one topic I wanted to stress with you. You touched many different platforms, like the very first consoles, then PCs. You even tried out mobile. Which is your favorite platform, A, as a developer, and B, as a player?
Geez. PC obviously was really big. But the funny thing about PC was Commander Keen and Wolfenstein were the games that we developed on PCs, but Doom 2, Quake, Heretic, and Hexen, those were all on Next Step workstations. Those were not DOS. So we were making all of those games for years on these really cool workstations, which turned into OS 10 on Mac, which is today. In fact, if you program a Mac and you're doing API calls, all the beginnings of the calls are NS something because it stands for Next Step, and Jobs didn't want that changed. But we developed them on Next Step on the Next Step operating system, which is cool because we could have the game running in a little window and we could have all the source code right next to it, just debug visually everything on the screen and write tools that looked way better than DOS. And so we could compile the code and it would save it as an actual executable for an Intel chip. And then we could just copy it to our C drives on our DOS machines and just run it. So we didn't actually compile even on PCs. We compiled it on the workstations and it created x86 code. Next Step was an operating system that ran on about 5 different types of chips, 5 architectures. So when you had an app, it had the code for all 5 different types of chips in it, and whatever chip was running, it would execute that piece of code inside of the app.
And as a player?
That was not a game playing platform, but the PC absolutely beats everything.
For you as a person, so you're a PC gamer.
Oh yeah,
still
totally.
Today.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you sometimes think like, what the fuck, man? Why didn't I start an esports company and worked on the success on the early ages of Quake and Doom deathmatch multiplayer sessions?
Well, we were talking about esports when we were making Quake. We used to go to LAN parties when Doom was out and go to Doom tournaments that were happening back in '94 or '95. And then we're starting to talk to people about esports, and in leagues were starting up. They were called clans at the very beginning, but then they kind of turned into leagues. And I was the chairman of the CPL, which is an esports company, for about 10 years. We just, at id Software, we didn't want to get involved in other businesses that were not game development. So we didn't do anything but game development. We didn't get into other things, which I think we should have done. I think we should have gone out. We should have merchandised our stuff. We had so many characters. We could have made pillows and t-shirts and all kinds of cool stuff. If only we would hire a couple more people at the company. But we were super small. And when I left id, there were only 13 of us, including the secretary and the biz guy. It's 13. So 9 people made Quake.
Cool. Okay, one question back there. I want to ask one, can you give the microphone to that guy, please? One design question before we come to his question. Like for multiplayer, like the balancing in levels must be quite difficult. Do you have like a trick or a rule for designing a level optimized for 2, 4, or maybe 8 players? And how do you keep the symmetry and without making it boring?
Well, you have to balance them, obviously, and you can't make it. I don't think that it's a good idea to make both sides of a map exactly the same. I think that there should be an advantage to the side, which is not a CTF design. That's just a general free-for-all arena design. I think both sides should not be the same. I think I'm all about asymmetry. But the best way to design a game is just to play the hell out of it. I mean, you have to play it with the number of people that you're trying to support. I like the idea that you could make a scalable level for people that just one-on-one all the way up to, say, 8 players by and I haven't seen anybody do this, but I'm sure maybe somebody's done it, where when the server launches, whatever the player max is on the server, it would basically remove walls. If the number of players were more than 2 players, then remove this set of walls, and that reveals more of the map and all the way up to the max. I think that's a cool way of using the same map for a lot more players, but also having like DM3 and Quake is great for more than 2 players. You need like 4 players to really maximize that map. But if we would have programmed Quake to handle scaling maps, then I could have had a much smaller area, a much smaller arena to do stuff in.
Okay, cool. Please.
With so much legacy, like, what drives you today? Do you have something to prove, or you do it for fun?
Well, it's all for fun. Like, that's the whole reason why I even started making games, is because games are super fun. And playing games is really great, but when you start making games, it's even more fun. And like, you get paid for it, so that's even better. And when you're doing level design is a certain kind of fun. Just building something like that, and you get to play it and run it over and over again. But programming is a completely different kind of fun, and it's super, super intense, and it's really awesome because you're just solving problems that you've created constantly. It's like driving in a snowstorm all day, but it's a really fun snowstorm.
Thanks you. Okay, there are 2 questions. I'll take the order just very briefly. If you see Doom the movie, if you were lying in the grave, would you like turn over in the grave? Or,
yeah, I didn't think it was a very good movie. I heard that they want to reboot it.
I heard so too, yeah. Yes, please.
Okay, so 2 years ago, an article on crack.com appeared with some juicy details from Ion Storm. Have you read it? Maybe
Ion Storm from crack.com.
Yeah, two employees.
Do you mean cracked?
Crack.com.
Cracked.com?
Yeah, this is a satirical website.
Okay, that's totally. There's a company called crack.com that was created by one of the id people to make the game Abuse. That's what I thought you were talking about. Not the satire site Cracked.
Yeah, it was on this satire site. The 2 former employees, they talked about some juicy details. Have you read it?
I haven't read it, but what juicy details do you want verified?
Yeah, well, one of the things that they claimed is that Like the modus operandi of Iron Storm was like to make games like make game developers like rock stars, and that's a bad business plan. But that
Yeah,
was one
I
of the
mean,
things.
that was something that the marketing guy wanted to do. I think I tweeted or maybe posted on Facebook, could have been a month ago, an advertisement that Iron Storm ran that just had our faces in it. It wasn't even advertising games. It was just the people who are running Iron Storm. Of course, the marketing guy is in there, like he's, you know, he's everyone has to know who he is. But yeah, it's like us four co-founders and the marketing guy and the CEO guy or the chief operating officer. Just, you know, I think it was maybe even a 2-page ad of just people, just us, and just talking about us instead of talking about games. I thought it was ridiculous. I mean, if the game's good, then people are going to know you, not like force it into a magazine. Hey, because it could backfire on you.
Okay.
Isn't that a bit also the story of your life? Like, it seems like you're the leader of a heavy metal band, and then you gather people around you to make your next gig.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of happens that way since I, start a company for a specific reason. Typically, it's like I'm going to do an MMO company, or I'm going to do a mobile company. I'm going to do a Facebook company. I'm going to do console or whatever. And so I have a company. I start a company and then hire the people for that company that would be best for that company. And I started doing that maybe in 2005, and before 2005, I actually didn't hire like that. I totally really didn't even know how to hire very well. So around 2005 is when it kind of went, I should probably hire just for this kind of game, the kind of people that do this. And so that's what I've been doing since then. And it's worked out much better.
Makes sense. There was a question over here.
Hi, just one question. A big part of what made the early titles very successful, at least to me, and fun to play, was the sound effects and the soundtracks. So during the 90s, or even a little bit before that, how did you acquire people who were good with the sound? So in this case, Bobby Prince, right?
Yeah, Bobby Prince. So Bobby was, the funny thing about Bobby Prince was he was a lawyer. He had a whole long career as a lawyer before he could make enough money to retire and do what he really loved doing, which was music. So Bobby was basically a jazz musician, and he loved jazz, but this new, computer game thing was happening, and MIDI was a new kind of interesting new technology to use. And I think at the time, the general MIDI synth set had been standardized, so it was even better. It was like about 128 standard sounds that everyone could kind of count on everyone having. So that got him more excited about audio, and he was the guy that was doing some music for Apogee. So Scott Miller found him somewhere. I think he might have even just told Scott, hey, I do music. And the thing is, back then, music was rare in games at that time. 1990 it was rare to hear music in a game because you had to write these special drivers to non-standard cards because there wasn't even a standardized audio card out back then. It was like AdLib was the AdLib Gold. They were the standard before Sound Blaster. And so Sound Blaster had kind of just come out, and they actually won. It took them about 3 years to beat AdLib out of the market. But there were a lot of other sound cards out there. Even Disney got in the act and had a thing called the Disney Sound Source. So there was a lot of crazy going on back then. But MIDI was the only kind of standard that you could count on as a musician, and digital audio just wasn't even happening until right around Wolfenstein. So it was real early days on audio. So it was a difficult thing, even though the Amiga and these anything that played mods sounded way better because they could use samples that were really cool. On the PC, we were pushing ourselves to do really good MIDI, and so we had Bobby Prince as a resource, and so we signed him. We basically contracted him to do the Commander Keen, the second set of Commander Keens, because the first ones never even had MIDI in it because we only used the PC speaker. That was the tech level at that point. So 91, we finally have some MIDI in our games, and that was great. And he got really good at doing it. And then we would direct him to make certain types of music, which for him was really fun. And then at the same time, since we could start doing samples with Wolfenstein, a lot of that was just recorded with a microphone and some sound samples on a synth on his programmable synthesizer. But when we got to Doom, a company called Sound Ideas had just released a really important, massive collection of sound effects called the General 6000 series, which is just tons of CDs packed with sound samples, and that's where all of Doom's sound effects came from, and they weren't even modified because no one had them yet. So why would you need to modify something that no one's ever heard? So that's why everybody heard the same sounds in movies and commercials, advertisements, that kind of stuff. But so we were lucky at the very beginning to have those resources to make audio cool. And so I was the one who handled all the music and sound effects for our game. So I interfaced with Bobby and then had him do the stuff, and then I actually put it in the game in the right places and shifted tracks. It's like, this level doesn't feel like this, this song. You gotta shift it around.
Was it you who cried "Halt" in Wolfenstein?
No, I don't think. Oh, halt. It might have been.
It's "Halt."
Halt. Yeah, I know. We did such awful German translations. I mean, this was pre-internet, and we had a German translation book. That was it, German dictionary, and we messed up a lot of words in that game. But most of the audio in Wolfenstein was just Tom and I, and Adrian did Schuhstaffel. That was basically it. Adrian did that, but Tom and I did all the other sound effects.
There was a question back there.
I might have been living under the rock for the last few years, but I'd really like to know what happened to the Blackroom project. Is it still being worked on, or are we going to see the tech demo anytime soon?
I can't talk about Blackroom.
Okay, why is that?
I just can't. I can't say why, because then that reveals something.
Okay, so we can expect something. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
I've had people ask the same thing. I just can't say anything about Blackroom, and Twitter feed has almost every day some kind of Blackroom information. But yeah, it's just can't say anything about it.
Okay, thanks.
But you can talk about Kickstarter in general. Is there some learnings you made during that campaign without mentioning the game title anymore? You once did a mysterious Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, the Blackroom Kickstarter.
That one, exactly.
Yeah,
Did you learn anything, and like for a second time, or for some consultancy to the crowds?
Yeah, we learned that we needed a game video, basically, not an actual playable demo. We needed to show people a video of what we were going to make. Like that, at that point, though, we're working with an agency that handles, that kind of thing. We're working with another agency that was doing the entire Kickstarter campaign page, and another agency that was doing PR. So we were working with 3 other agencies that all said, you don't need a video. And Bloodstained had just basically come out with no video, and they raised, millions. And they said, you're not going to need a video, so don't worry about it. And when you're making games, if you're spending time on making demos, like that costs money. And the whole point of Kickstarter, I thought, was to kickstart a project, and with especially with the kind of games that cost more than you think that you can raise on Kickstarter, you can get basically funding promises from publishers. If you can raise this much money, 10% or whatever, then we will fund the rest of it. That's, to me, what Kickstarter should be. It's the kickstarting of a project, not fullyfunded.com. It's kickstarter.com, right? So that was the goal, was to raise a certain amount, which then we had financing ready to go. If we raise that much, that's definitely they will fund the rest of it. And to do that, we're expecting that money would help us create this cool demo, and then we could show that to the publisher, who probably goes out and gets more funding and that kind of thing. And then we would show backers and all that kind of stuff. But Kickstarter evolved to the point where we want to see that you've worked on a game for a long time already, and that's not how games are actually ever made, or mostly made. You go in and you pitch publishers with ideas, and if they like the idea, then you talk about it more, and then they spend money to maybe make prototypes of it. But most of the time, game developers don't make games before they get funded, unless well, unless they have the means to do that, you know.
Any question I didn't see back there? While he's running over, like if you were a publisher yourself, which would be the type of game you would like to support? Put all your money into it, even better.
Probably something new that I hadn't seen before. I'd be more excited about new types of games than just something that fills the genre up. Unless it was looked like it was gonna be the best in that genre and could beat the competition. Like I wouldn't want to fund a game that would go against Overwatch, or try to fund a game that would go against WoW. You know, I would fund a game that went against Hearthstone. You know, but to me, it's not as exciting to do that because it's just, why would I want to fund a clone? I would rather fund a new, exciting, original idea that, like games that are, people call them walking simulators, but I call them interactive narratives, where you actually like on home and What Remains of Edith Finch and Firewatch and stuff like that. I love those games because they're just very different, new, and it's a new thing that people are doing, and it's going to go somewhere. I would fund a game that took what Minecraft had created and showed everybody, the idea of creating and playing integrated into the same world, taking that to the next level versus just another Minecraft ripoff. I want to see where does that go, because that's where that's really exciting, because there will be a game that really has learned from Minecraft and has taken it to the next level. You're building and you're playing at the same time, and it feels great in this exploration. There's just so much right with Minecraft.
Thanks. Back in the end.
Hello. Okay.
Is anyone home?
From some flame war about programming languages. I remember that Jonathan Blow said once that there are still programmers that know how computers work. And my question is, do you feel that knowing this assembly level of things does help you today in any way while programming?
I don't think it does, unless you're trying to write really optimized code. Like today, even right now, like if you go into Visual Studio and you write C++, if you're doing anything complex in there, you're throwing your cycles away because the runtime calls are just going to chew up your CPU. So if you look at your disassembly of your source, you can see that there are potential optimizations that you can make, because you could do a simple indexing on just one line of code. You could index into an array a certain way, just using the square brackets, and do this indexing. Maybe you're indexing with multiplies and all this, and when you look at your disassembly, you can see that the compiler is creating like 10 lines to get to that point, versus assigning a pointer at the very beginning and just using that. Like there's massive differences in how you could use your memory, and I think that's useful. Knowing assembly and knowing how to read your disassembly can help you get to really great optimizations that are very simple. It's like you just say in general, it's a good idea to assign a pointer, do a complex multiplication, pointer multiplication, assign it to a pointer, and then just use that pointer later, versus let's do that calculation every time we try and index that array. That's wasteful, and most people never think about it because you don't look at the disassembly. You're getting it done. But if you do pay attention to what the machine code looks like and how many cycles you're chewing up, you would totally change how you program. And also just the real-time stuff, the runtime stuff. When you do multiple inheritance and all these things are going to call into runtime, you're losing all kinds of cycles doing that. So object pooling is really important. Don't do allocation, deallocation, like all kinds of stuff that you would learn if you came from a low-level programming standpoint, where you actually had to operate on memory for years, and you know what memory is all about. You don't necessarily need to know everything about CPUs, which is really important though, like cache missing and staying within your cache, so you don't have any fetches and branch prediction, all the things that CPUs do. That's amazing. Knowing how they work helps you write really efficient code. But it's, you know, it's important, but it's not as important now if you just have a faster CPU. And now there's lots of interpreted languages like Lua and stuff that also they're fast, but they're not direct to machine code. I think it's helpful, but I don't think it's required.
One more. Do you think?
Sorry, we only have 5 minutes left,
sorry.
and I want to.
Thank you.
Thanks. I want to say hello to somebody who is apparently born in June 6. He asks, and that's actually a good final question. Also, like the player unknown Battlegrounds is like a massive current phenomenon.
Yep.
Any recommendations you would give to the makers of this game? What their next steps should be?
Geez, listen to the players and try to, you know, you need a high percentage of feedback on any certain thing to change it. You don't just listen to 1 or 2 people saying, oh, you need to add this to the game, because you just could piss off everybody else. So they have a magic formula right now that's working really, really well. It's great because it feels like it's not a polished game. You know, it's not this super smooth polished game. Character movement, I'd say fix it. Fix character movement in the game, make it good. You know, if you can get it super smooth, that's really nice, but the game is really fun that it feels rough. To me, it feels like the original Ghost Recon, just with a ton of players. But Ghost Recon also had the same, like, it wasn't really great movement, but the gameplay was really great. So I think just get that movement down, you know, just keep smoothing it out and making it nicer. And I think the game itself is just awesome. I just love it.
You play it yourself?
Yeah, it's really fun. I love the game.
Okay, everybody find Romero and play Battleground.
Or Death Truck. That's my name.
Yeah. Death Truck? Okay.
Yeah.
Here you go. Talking about which, later tonight at around 6:30, he'll be back up on stage and deathmatching the hell out of it.
Doom 2 Deathmatch.
Doom 2 Deathmatch, level 7, we learned. That's the best level for multiplayer deathmatch in Doom 2. Do you actually miss, because you were talking about movement in Battlegrounds, do you miss this happenings in current games, that there is like a bug, like strafe jumping, and which can be exploited, or rocket jumping and stuff like that? Do you think it's like, okay, people think too far ahead, taking the experiences, the bad experiences of the past games into their designs and trying to avoid these mistakes?
Yeah, some of the mistakes are pretty cool. You know, like in Doom, having the silent BFG trick was really, really cool, and it was something that was hard to do. And if you got really good at it, you know, and if you're playing someone else who also is good at it, there's a totally different psychological warfare going on when you're both really good and you know how to use the silent BFG trick all the time, and you know how the BFG works, because that's another really crazy bug about the BFG, is just how it even works and how you can exploit that. But when everybody knows what the exploits are and everyone's at that level, the game turns really crazy because you're doing things that are not like obvious. They're not obvious. So if I'm playing somebody who knows the BFG trick and I do, and I just see them, I just hear like a noise, and then they like strafe into the tunnel in front of me and they're not even shooting at me, I'm probably gonna die, because the BFG is gonna hit the wall in the other room and he's looking at me. So I have to run immediately behind a wall before the rays cast out and cast, you know, massive damage. And it's just because of the way the BFG works. So I think people that learn these things, you know, they can exploit them, and everybody else kind of knows about them, and it's kind of cool as long as it's not breaking the game and causing errors. But games that are super smooth, like Overwatch, that don't have these kind of issues, people focus more on just that character and how to use that character in a really good way. And of course, they're always trying to find some micro exploit, because that's part of the fun of playing these games. But you know, as a programmer and a game developer, I don't want to put stuff in the game that breaks it and makes everyone want to leave. You know, because there are games that have such a horrible exploit that everybody's using it, and it just makes the community leave because it's not worth playing anymore. So those you have to fix. But other stuff that just makes it fun and everybody knows how to do it, if it doesn't ruin the game, then I would just leave it in.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And
Thanks
time
a lot,
for applause.